It's Denver Sports Tonight on this Thursday night in the Mile High City. He's James Merilatt. I'm Will Peterson. We'll roll with you for the next hour. A lot to get into. We had a heated night last night. I had a lot of people reach out to me. James, that press conference, man, that happened on Tuesday afternoon. And then you and I, we were like that boiling thing. Like, we had 36 hours to stew on that, and we had a lot to get off our chest and only an hour to do it.
Did you have a wellness check or two? People just making sure you're okay?
Yeah, people knocking on the door. You all right, bro?
Hey, we were fired up, and that's okay. I think there were a lot of things in that press conference that were worthy of being fired up about. And the other part of it, Will, because I was thinking about it too. I'm driving home from the studio last night, and like, man, we were on one tonight, and it really is just the fact. For me, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we're coming at it from the same vantage point here. I just care about this team finding success, and to such a degree that it infuriates me when they've gone this long without having any, and when I think they're on a wrong path and not doing the things they need to do to right the course. It's hard to just sit there and not say anything. It's hard to not scream from the mountaintops. It's hard to not be irate about it. So it came from a good place, but yes, we were fired up, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Denver Broncos, and I want the Denver Broncos to get back to the glory days, and that starts with a winning record. That starts with making the playoffs, something they haven't done in 7-8 years. 7 for the winning record, 8 for the playoffs. And when Greg Penner goes up there and tells me, hey, we're just as impatient as you are, your actions didn't speak to me that you're just as impatient as I am. And that's why I got fired up, and that's why I said it probably 10 different ways yesterday. I would have felt better about the direction of the Broncos if they had moved on from George Paton, which I told you last night I think would have been about a 2 out of 10 move. It wouldn't have sent shockwaves across Denver, across the NFL, whereas you would have felt better if they had maybe moved on from Sean Payton, which of course would have sent shockwaves around the NFL. You're right. We have the same goal. We just had different approaches of how to get there.
Well, and I was also thinking about this. I've said this a bunch on the air. I recently turned 50. Yeah, that's half century. That's a lot of years. So born in 1973, so I missed the first 13 years of Broncos football, which was dreadful. But in my lifetime, I've never gone this long without the Broncos being in the playoffs. I mean, to some extent, I never went this long without them going to a Super Bowl. I mean, they went to a Super Bowl when I was 4. Then it was 9 years. So this popped into my head today because this is the anniversary of the drive. So January 11th, 1987, the 86 season, it felt like it had been an eternity since the Broncos had been to the Super Bowl. It had been 9 years, and it felt like it was never going to happen again. We're almost at that point just going to the playoffs. So they go to the Super Bowl in 86, 87, 89. Then they don't go again until the 97 season, which again felt like an eternity. 8 years, right? We're that long without going to the playoffs. 98, they go back, long stretch for Super Bowl, 15 years before 2013. You and I were both at that one. And then they go back 2 years later. But in that stretch between 98 and 2013, a 15-year gap between Super Bowls, they went to the playoffs. They went to an AFC title game with Jake Plummer. I mean, they have never had a stretch where for this many consecutive years they did not go to the playoffs in my lifetime, and I've been around for a half a century. It's a staggering record of ineptitude. It's a staggering stretch of futility, and quite frankly, I'm over it. I'm over it, and I'm tired of hearing people try and sell me on the latest plan and the latest vision that I don't think has a chance of succeeding. So maybe I'm grumpy old man, Will. I'm just yelling at the clouds at this point, but I'm frustrated. I'm tired of it, and it's the old line from the movie Network. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I was grumpy 33-year-old man, so I feel your pain yesterday. We were both upset. We both got a lot off our chests. We're not going to spend the next hour rehashing it. I promise you that. But I just wanted to start the top of the show with that. But what I do want to get to, James, is sort of one of the biggest interesting pieces of the news of the day to me. And that is not only are Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll apparently okay with Russell Wilson sending the nice tweet yesterday when Pete his tenure as the head coach of the Seahawks came to an end. But, James, Russell Wilson flies to Seattle last night. Nice to have a private jet. You can get wherever you want, whenever you want.
Yep.
And goes to Pete Carroll's celebration of his coaching tenure with some big names, the Bobby Wagners, the Richard Shermans, the Tyler Lockett's of the world. your take on this sudden friendship between Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. Russ shared all kinds of pictures of the event on social media. Certainly looks like that messy divorce that happened in the spring of 2022 is behind both of them, because there's no way Russ is invited if it's not. There's no way Russ goes if he's still bitter about it. What do you make of this sudden rekindling between Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll? And I'll just ask the question because it's been floated a little bit. Is there a chance of a reunion in a new city? They're both not free agents technically, but they're both going to be on new teams next year.
Well, a couple of things sort of came to mind when I saw the story, because admittedly I was surprised by it. I wasn't surprised by the tweet yesterday. It's very easy to be sitting in Cabo and send a tweet. You take 30 seconds making sure you spelled everything right, you hit send, and then you go back to the pool bar, right? Like, that doesn't take any effort. The tweet didn't surprise me. The fact that he was there last night, it admittedly surprised me. So the first part of it was, first takeaway for me was, time heals all wounds, and sometimes you don't know you're in the best. Well, most of the time, you don't know you're in the best of times when you're in them.
Sure.
And then you get to the end of it, and you're like, gosh, we all had it pretty good. That was a pretty good run. And you see this a lot with, heck, you see it with couples, you see it with teams, you see it with casts of TV shows, right? That they think that, let me leave, I'm going to go do something else. Like, man, I should have stuck it out. It was, it was a pretty good run we had going on Cheers, right? So that was the first part of it, of like, okay, I think both of them kind of got away. They've gotten some perspective. I'm sure Russ has a different appreciation for Pete. I'm sure Pete has a different appreciation for Russ after this year. So I think that was the first part. The second part was, and I think this applies to what's going on right here, right now. I think the media, social media, fans tend to overstate and oversimplify these relationships.
Okay.
Right? Of like, oh, Pete Carroll hates Russell Wilson, wanted him out of there. Russell Wilson hated Pete Carroll. I think that was overstated. I don't think, this isn't 10 years later. This isn't at Pete Carroll's induction into the Hall of Fame, and everybody's like, you know what? Let's let bygones be bygones. It's not even 2 years later. It's 22 months. So I don't think there was this rift and this disdain and this hatred that everybody thought. Do I think that Russ wanted to go somewhere else where he could be, more the guy? Sure. And I think that's human nature. And, maybe you don't want to be in a place where everybody thinks, hey, it's the defense, it's the running game, and then it's Russ. You kind of want to go be where you're the number one reason. So I understand that. And I'm sure Pete was tired of having Russ come to his office and ask him to be the number one thing. And he's just like, we both need to move on. So I don't think the Sean Payton, Russell Wilson relationship is as bad as people think. I tend to believe what we heard out of Sean Payton yesterday, talking about Russ, and they had a good 30-minute conversation, and if it was over, it would have been goodbye. Doesn't mean I think he's for sure coming back. I won't go that far. But last week when you and I talked about it, I was like at 5%. I've been at 10%, the most of this week. I think it's about a 25% chance Russ is back here next year and in 2025. And I think what we saw last night in that picture shows us that, these guys, it's a business. They understand that it's a business. But at the end of the day, there's not this disdain between them that we maybe conjure up. How about you? What was the takeaway?
Well, in the root of the divorce, first of all, the root of the divorce was Russ wanted to cook, and Pete didn't want him to cook and was frustrated he held onto the football for too long. Sound familiar, right? Like that was kind of my biggest takeaway is you went back and read the ESPN bombshell article inside the divorce that came out in the spring of 2022, and Pete Carroll's biggest frustration was he didn't want Russ to cook, and he wanted Russ to get rid of the ball. What did Russ do in his 2 years in Denver? Even you will admit this. He took too many sacks, right? So
Yep.
it was what Pete was seeing was the truth, that Russ couldn't get rid of the football on time, and Russ wanted to be the alpha. He wanted to be the 1A. Pete wanted to rely on the defense and running game, and their styles didn't mesh, so it led to a divorce. So my biggest takeaway, which you asked me, and I will gladly answer, is that some 19, 20, 21 months later, these dudes never hated each other. And
No.
to your point, it was so overblown. They just had different life philosophies. And sometimes, like you said, it could be a relationship, it could be a job. If you have different life philosophies, you just got to go your separate ways. That doesn't mean you got a voodoo doll of the other person sitting on your couch stabbing it every night. It just meant that Pete wanted to try something with a new quarterback, and Russ wanted to try to go be the alpha at a new team. And so my takeaway is that, yes, it was wildly overblown. And I did find it fascinating, too. I mean, he's not just in the room with Pete, James. He's in the room with Richard Sherman, who notoriously ripped him on all those Amazon Prime broadcasts last year, was actually cackling and laughing out loud after Russ threw the picks against Indy and missed KJ Hamler because Sherm never totally said it, but it reminded him so much of Super Bowl 49 when Russell Wilson threw the pick to Malcolm Butler when they could have just run it to Marshawn Lynch. Same thing, Broncos at the goal line against the Colts can't get it in. So, man, not only was he in the room with Pete, he was in the room with Sherm. To be a fly on that wall at that party would have been awful fun.
Yeah, and I think, and this is me psychoanalyzing it from 1,000 miles away or whatever, but I also think it stands to reason that everybody you're talking about there probably realizes that the other person had a little bit of a point, right? So surely Russell Wilson, you can say a lot about Russell Wilson, but I don't think he's a dummy. And a prime example of that is he came back this year at the weight he was at in Seattle and realized I'm a better player at that weight than trying to bulk up and be a pocket passer. And he was clearly better this year. And he was clearly closer this season to being Seattle Russ than he was a year ago. Like, it was night and day. Like, I don't think anybody can deny that. And I think he probably can look at it and say, hey, Pete maybe did have a point where maybe I'm not the guy who can go out there and cook like a Manning or a Brady or a Mahomes, where I do have to be part of a system. And I maybe do hang on to the football a little too long and take too many sacks. I also think Pete probably has the realization of like, yeah, you know what? My style and my system works, and we want to play a lot of close games. But you know what the difference is between 7-10 and 8-9, or 11-6 and 12-5, is having a guy that's got a little bit of magic and can pull out close games late. And Russell Wilson can do that, whereas on a week-in, week-out basis, Geno Smith can't do it. We saw Drew Locke do it once this year. But that was the kind of win when Drew pulled it off with that 92-yard drive or whatever it was, that you saw the Seahawks pull off time and time and time again. Now, a lot of that was, think back to their upset, their crazy win over the Packers in the playoffs, and remember they got the onside kick and all the rest of that. Like, yes, a lot of things have to go their way. Defense has to make stops. Special teams has to get a recovery on an onside kick. All that kind of stuff.
There was like a fake punt or field goal
right.
mixed in too, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
All these kind of weird things. But still, at the end of the day, they had to have a quarterback that when they put the ball in his hands with a minute left, got him in the end zone, got the 2-point conversion, whatever the combination was. It was the crazy combination that had to happen. And that's what Russ was. And we did see that quite often here, right? The end of the Buffalo game, we saw, I mean, he had 4 or 5 game-winning drives this year. He almost had 2 that really would have changed the season. 2 more would have changed the season and probably would have kept him here. He got within 8 yards of pulling it off in Houston.
Yep.
1st and goal from the 8. And then 23-23, ball in your hands with 2.5, 3 minutes left, whatever it was, on Christmas Eve against New England. We can say that's play calling. We can say it's personnel. We can say whatever, but those are the kind of moments that typically Russell Wilson pulled it out. That's why we were shocked that they lost the Houston game at that point. And that's the part of it in the last 2 years. Last year they made the playoffs barely and then got beat. This year they didn't make the playoffs. That's that little element of kind of magic and of special that the Seahawks didn't have once they traded away Russell Wilson. That's the difference between being competitive and being a contender. And I think Pete Carroll probably realizes that. And then, look, Richard Sherman went and played in a lot of other places. How many Super Bowls did he go to without Russell Wilson?
I don't believe any.
And he was on some good teams, and he bounced around. He was in San Francisco for a while and some other places. But, I think if you got him a little bit of truth serum, he probably looks at it, too, and says, yeah, did Russ throw a pick that cost us a Super Bowl? Yeah, but think about the miracle throws he had on that drive. I forget who the receiver was. I think it was Doug Baldwin. But one of them was like laying on his back when he makes a catch. Like, there was a lot of magic that Russ was pulling off to even put them in that position that other quarterbacks simply wouldn't have had. So I think everybody, and somebody retiring and Pete walking away, and it kind of makes you a little bit reflective. I think everybody involved probably looks at it and says, you know what, I was a little bit right in the situation, but so was the other guy.
Yeah, but and that kind of gets me to the next question, which I asked you off the top, but I asked you about 5 different questions, so we'll circle back to this one. I don't think Pete retired. I think Pete was forced out, and they told Pete he's now an advisor, and Pete's gone, I don't really know if I'm ready to be an advisor. I still want to be a coach. You look at some of the odds around the leagues for some of the openings, and Pete Carroll's name is right near the top. Is there a chance, and I don't think this is an outrageous question to ask, is there a chance that like Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson end up together in, I don't know, Atlanta, something like that? could the groundwork being laid for a reunion? And man, what a wild story that would be.
Well, now that's a good example, because what I would say about Pete Carroll or Bill Belichick, two guys that are in their early 70s, is they're not going somewhere where it's a rebuild.
Absolutely not. He's not going to work with Ritter and Heineke in Atlanta. Pete Carroll's not doing that. Absolutely not.
So, you look at some of the job openings, like the Chargers makes a lot of sense for either one of those guys, because part of the reason they're such a frustrating team is they're loaded with talent, and particularly they have a really good young quarterback who at this point hasn't won squat because he's been led by Brandon Staley. Like, I would think you take that Charger roster, given Pete Carroll, given Bill Belichick, they're a contender in 24, 25, 26. And those guys
it should be a 12-win team every year with a competent head coach. Yeah, no doubt.
You make a good point with Atlanta, though, because Atlanta's got a really good roster other than quarterback. They got Kyle Pitts, they got London on the outside, they got Robinson in the backfield, who was grossly underused. Man, you put Russell Wilson on that offense, all of a sudden they got something to work with. So I could see either one of those guys with Russ in Atlanta. That would make a lot of sense. But it's got to be a place that, either they have the pieces ready and they just need the right coach, which there aren't a lot of those, because if you've got all the pieces, typically the coach isn't getting fired. You're going to have some success. Or there's a way to patch that hole. And I do think Russell Wilson, let's say Mike Tomlin leaves Pittsburgh, right?
Okay.
There's still those rumblings. You don't think Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson joining that Steeler team would all of a sudden make them a contender next year? Of course it would.
It would.
So there are some interesting places where I'm with you. I don't think Pete is done, but I also think he's got 3 or 4 years in him. I don't think he's going somewhere for a 5-year rebuild.
Can you imagine the book, though, of how Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll came back together, and it was born at sort of, let's be honest, probably kind of an impromptu party? Because I don't think Pete walked into the facility yesterday morning thinking he was no longer going to be the Seahawks head coach. I think he walked out with the Seahawks management trying to spin it as, hey, mutual parting of ways. He's now an advisor. And then he goes to his press conference, and you can go listen to the audio. Pete doesn't sound like he's ready to just be an advisor. So you're imagining this is all going down in real time, right? And we know Russ has the private jet. We've all seen the pictures of it. Russ is probably just chilling in Denver. Yesterday around, 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, whenever that Pete Carroll news drops, and he gets a text from someone, most likely Pete. Hey, we're having a party tonight. We're getting the band back together. Can you get up here? Russ calls his pilot, takes the SUV over to Centennial, gets on the bird, gets to Seattle, gets to Pete's party. I couldn't sleep last night. All of a sudden, I'm refreshing Twitter at 12:30, and there's Russell Wilson posting these photos at 11:30 Seattle time. They partied late into the night, celebrating Pete, telling stories, talking about their Super Bowls. There's a reason that all went down that quickly, that impromptu, because A, like I've said from the start, the relationship was never as bad as we thought. But B, you can call me tinfoil hat. You can call me whatever you want. I think a reunion is more possible than anyone is giving it credit for at this moment in time on January 11th.
No, I don't think that's conspiracy theory. I think it's a little, I don't know if Machiavellian is the right term, but I'll use it, where I think each guy, you're right, probably had a little bit of an agenda, right? If you're Pete Carroll and you're thinking, where else am I going to land? And if I go to Atlanta, to use that example, how am I solving that problem quickly? You know who would solve that quarterback problem for me? My old buddy Russell Wilson.
For very, very cheap, by the way.
Right, for $1 million.
Yes.
If you're, at least next year. If you're Russell Wilson and you're looking at it saying, you know what, I want to go prove Sean Payton and George Paton and Greg Penner wrong. I want to go somewhere and win. You're probably looking at it and saying, you know who had a lot of success with for a decade? Pete Carroll. And if he lands in a spot that makes sense for me, I want to make sure that bridge isn't burned. Okay, I'll get on it. Because, listen, he's got a lot of money. He's got a private jet. I get it. That's still not a super convenient thing to do. It's a 3-hour flight each way. How many people in your life would you drop everything, change your plans, and drive from Centennial to Fort Collins to go to their retirement party tonight? A handful?
Yeah, not that many. I mean,
right.
You're right. His life is something we'll never know. It's way, way, way easier to get places than it is for you and I. We probably couldn't have gotten Seattle last night. He has that luxury, but he also doesn't have a machine where he can just go stand in it and poof, he's there. He's still got to go through the hassle.
Right, and it's still, he still has a wife and 4 kids and a newborn, and, probably they're working on vacation plans because the season ended, whatever. Like, they still have things they got to juggle. I don't know that he was just sitting around doing absolutely nothing and was like, oh, good, Sierra's out of town. The kids are out of town. Now I got something to do. Maybe. But I think it's sometimes their life is more like ours than you think. It's just a little bit more extravagant, but you still have to move things. Like if this would have happened with you tonight, it would have been like, all right, geez, I got to get somebody to cover the show. I got to figure out how I'm going to get up there. I got to deal with I-25 traffic. I got to do this. I got to do that. Who's going to write my column for them? Whatever, right? Like everybody's got things you got to move around. I think it speaks volumes to Russ's character, one, that he did it. Both of them, really. It could be easy for both of them to just continue to hold the grudge and, be sticking pins in the voodoo doll like you talked about. But do I think it was just purely just being, hey, I'm going to be a good guy? No. Probably in the back of their minds, and maybe even subconsciously, they both were looking at it and saying, I might need that guy again. Let's go make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah, and he was dropping off Win yesterday at school. I mean, I'm looking at the tweet right now, 10:22 a.m., Joys of Life, Daddy School drop-off with Win. Pete Carroll was in a meeting at 10:22 a.m. where he had no idea he was no longer going to be the Seahawks head coach. This party, impromptu get-together, whatever you want to call it, wasn't on Russell Wilson's radar. I find the whole thing fascinating. I really do. And I just think that this is laying the groundwork for a potential reunion. And maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe Russ returns to the Broncos, which you now think has a 25% chance. Maybe Pete looks around and says, you know what? An advisory role does sound all right, not the day-to-day, and he's an advisor to the Seahawks. Maybe. That could all very well happen. But if Pete's in the market for a new head coaching gig and Russ is in the market for a new quarterback gig, there's just not that many places where they can intersect. And there's a chance they land on the same team in a matter of, Pete would get hired in the next couple of weeks and then Russ would join him in the next couple of months.
Well, look, I've had people rolling their eyes at me in the last 48 hours because I've been suggesting, look, Jim Harbaugh was the guy you wanted a year ago. He didn't want to leave Michigan at that point, so you went with Sean Payton. Now he probably wants to leave Michigan. He's won a national title. He dealt with all the issues this year of being suspended for the sign stealing nonsense, all the rest of it. If he was your guy a year ago, there's no reason to not go get him now. Like, just go get him. I think you could make the same argument for Pete Carroll. Is Pete Carroll an upgrade from Sean Payton?
All right, hang on. You're now advocating for the Broncos to hire Pete Carroll? Is that where this is going?
I'm just asking. Is he an upgrade with Russell Wilson on this roster? And you can either have him here and pay him $76 million over the next 2 years, or you can eat $85 million in dead cap and pay him $39 million in cash over the next 2 years. Who has a better chance of success with Russell Wilson over the next 2 years, Pete Carroll or Sean Payton? I'm asking the question. I'm not advocating it. I'm advocating Jim Harbaugh. I think that's the guy you wanted. He turned you down. Now he's available. Go get your number one choice. I think, to me, that makes all the sense in the world. I'm just asking, do you think Pete Carroll's a better option than Sean Payton in Denver?
Specifically for Russell Wilson, yes. Big picture,
money's no object.
Big picture, I'm not so sure. But yes, if Russ was somehow going to be the QB in 2024, I'd probably rather have Pete coach him than Sean. Yeah.
I would too. Okay. I'm just throwing it out there again, there's no salary cap for coaches. You just have to eat the money, and cash and dollars that's no object for the Walton Penner family ownership group. It's not.
All right, a fun conversation, a winding conversation that led us to James Merilatt advocating for Pete Wilson.
I'm not advocating. Pete Carroll. I asked the question.
Oh, man, too much fun,
I'm advocating for Jim Harbaugh.
Hey, I want you to help us grow our Denver Sports YouTube channel. You can like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video.